Are you having a hard time figuring out what to get Dad for Father's Day? Shop now at sportshistorynetwork.com/row1 and save 15% off your order when you check out Row 1 Brand's Vintage Sports Pictorium Gallery. They have America's best sports art. With over 7,200 historic sports prints, you're assured to find something unique for Dad this Father's Day. If he's an NFL buff, check out the 1963 vintage NFL helmet poster. Shop now at sportshistorynetwork.com/row1.
Hello, sports fans, and welcome to this week's edition of the Historically Speaking Sports Podcast, where we examine and relive the best moments in sports 1 week at a time. I'm your host, Dana Auguster, and this week we're going to be talking about, of course, the Super Bowl. The Super Bowl is just a few days away, and instead of us talking about the teams, players, strategy of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers or the Kansas City Chiefs, I'm going to be concentrating more so on the city, the host city, Tampa, which is hosting its 5th Super Bowl ever. And each one of those Super Bowls has a very unique place in Super Bowl history, making Tampa one of the premier locations for the Super Bowl. It has to go all the way back to 1976 with Hugh Culverhouse, who was very instrumental in bringing the NFL to Tampa, Florida. Tampa at the time was one of the fastest growing cities in the nation. And Tampa seemed like a very, very interesting place and a very good place to have a pro football team with the popularity, of college football and high school football. So Hugh Culverhouse was a Tampa businessman, and he lured the NFL to Tampa. And one of the things that he said in getting the Tampa Bay Buccaneers was, first, the NFL, next, the Super Bowl. So he didn't have to really wait long before the NFL awarded the city of Tampa its first Super Bowl, which was to be played in January of 1984. And what a Super Bowl it was supposed to be. That year, 1984, Super Bowl 18 featured the Los Angeles Raiders taking on the Washington Redskins. And both teams had actually played earlier that year, with the Redskins edging the Raiders 37-35 at RFK Stadium. So both teams heading into this Super Bowl, and a lot of prognosticators and experts said that this was going to go right down to the wire, just like the previous game. Unfortunately, it didn't turn out that way, but the game was very memorable for a performance. And that performance, of course, was from game MVP Marcus Allen. He had 191 yards and scored 2 touchdowns, including a remarkable 74-yard touchdown run at the end of the third quarter, which pretty much broke the game open for Oakland, for the Raiders, I should say. I keep wanting to say Oakland, but excuse me on that. For the Los Angeles Raiders, as the Raiders won it 38-9. It was pretty much wasn't even that close. The game was pretty much ended right before the half when Jack Squire had a pick 6 on Joe Theismann and just basically walked into the end zone to give the Raiders an insurmountable lead. But Marcus Allen's performance in that game put the Super Bowl and the city of Tampa on the map of hosting the big game. After that game, it was proclaimed that Tampa was finally a big league NFL city, despite what the football team at the time was doing, which was struggling. So with Marcus Allen's performance and Tampa's showcase of the Super Bowl that year, put it on the map. So the NFL was very, very excited about having another one there. They wouldn't have to wait long. By 1991, a few years later, the Super Bowl would return to Tampa. But this time, it was going to be a little bit different. For you see, in 1991, in January, the Super Bowl was kind of like the afterthought of what was going on else in the world, because just the week prior to the Super Bowl was Operation Desert Storm, when the United States invaded Iraq. So everybody's mind was elsewhere, concentrating on what was going on over there as far as like what's going on, are we going to war, that type of thing. So the Super Bowl in 1991 between the Giants and Bills was basically a diversion from what was going on elsewhere. And it was very memorable within its own right. It was actually one of the best Super Bowls ever played, both exciting-wise and aesthetically, because that Super Bowl didn't have any turnovers, very few penalties, and it came right down to the wire. At the beginning of the game was also a very memorable moment when you had Whitney Houston performing one of the greatest renditions of the national anthem ever heard, coming out in her tracksuit and wowing the fans at Tampa Stadium. But the game, of course, came down to the final 8 seconds specifically, when Scott Norwood missed the game-winning field goal, giving the New York Giants their second Super Bowl win. But the game itself was just an unbelievable diversion for a country that was looking for something else to take its mind off of what was going on else in the world. And it delivered. And Tampa was the site. 9 years later, the Super Bowl would once again return to Tampa. But instead of it being at Tampa Stadium, which was affectionately known as the Big Sombrero, the Super Bowl would be in brand new Raymond James Stadium, the new home of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And that Super Bowl was memorable within itself because of a performance by not an offensive player or a singer, but an ensemble of players known as the Baltimore Ravens defense. Baltimore's defense that year was one of the top defenses, not only that year, but perhaps of all time. And they'll be taking on the New York Giants, which was making their third Super Bowl appearance and was something of a Cinderella story, knocking off the heavily favored Minnesota Vikings in the NFC Championship that year. It was the very first Super Bowl, as I say, was at Raymond James Stadium, and Baltimore's defensive captain and all-time linebacker Ray Lewis led the way, garnering MVP honors as the Ravens won 34-7. The Giants was dominated defensively, matter of fact, becoming the third Super Bowl team ever not to score an offensive touchdown, joining the likes of the 71 Dolphins and the 1988 Cincinnati Bengals, failing to score an offensive touchdown. They did score, but it was on a punt return. So you have 3 games and 3 memorable performances. Yet those 3 would pale in comparison to the Super Bowl that would take place just 7 years later, Super Bowl 43, between the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Arizona Cardinals. Pittsburgh was eyeing their 6th Super Bowl championship. Meanwhile, Arizona was looking for their first NFL championship since 1947. And this game, once again, played at Raymond James Stadium, would be an absolute classic. The first half with the Steelers leading 10-7. Kurt Warner had threw a pass into the end zone, which was intercepted by James Harrison at the goal line, and he weaved his way down the sidelines, avoiding breaking tackles all the way into the end zone to give the Steelers a 17-7 lead. After the Steelers gain a 20-7 lead thanks to a field goal, the Cardinals make a rally to take the lead late in the game on a 64-yard touchdown reception by Larry Fitzgerald. But Ben Roethlisberger and Santonio Holmes would team up for one of the greatest plays in Super Bowl history at the corner of the end zone as Santonio Holmes tapped out touchdown in the corner to give the Steelers the win and another Super Bowl championship. Once again, in Tampa. So what we have in store this upcoming week in Tampa, Florida, who's to say? But one thing is definitely for certain. Hugh Culverhouse, who was instrumental in bringing the NFL to Tampa, was right. First, the NFL, next the Super Bowl. And this week, his city and his team will be center stage at the Super Bowl. You're listening to the Historically Speaking Sports Podcast. Once again, I'm your host, Dana Augusta, and just a reminder to everybody that we have a number of great podcasts on our Sports History Network. One of those is Football is Family podcast, hosted by my sports history brother from another mother, Jeremy McFarland. And this week, his podcast features Clayton Truder, who talks about the NFL and how the sport helped heal America after certain events that took place that captured America's attention and how the NFL helped move away from that. It was a great podcast. So if you have a chance, check him out and check out the others right here on the Sports History Network. And now, this week's Top 5. And we're back. And right now we're going to be talking about the top 5 events that happened in sports history between January the 24th and January the 30th. Number 5, an NBA icon comes out of retirement. Magic Johnson of the Los Angeles Lakers, after taking a hiatus from basketball, comes back out of retirement and scores 19 points and also records 8 rebounds and 10 assists in a 128-118 win over the Golden State Warriors. He will remain on the team for the remainder of the 1996 regular season. While he was there, the Lakers compiled a 22-16 record, yet narrowly missing the playoffs. Number 4, Super Bowl 34. One of the greatest Super Bowls, or probably one of the best finishes in Super Bowl history, took place here in Atlanta between the St. Louis Rams and the Tennessee Titans. On the last play of the game is remembered when Kevin Dyson caught a pass from Steve McNair and was dropped 1 yard short of the end zone that would have put the game into overtime. But Mike Jones' tackle on the 1 yard line preserved the Rams' win and their first NFL championship since 1951. Number 3, the opening of the first Winter Olympics in Chamonix, France. This would become a winter ritual that would be performed every 4 years, as the Winter Olympics would become the counterpart of the Summer Olympics to be held every 4 years. The United States would host the Olympics 4 different times, beginning in 1932 in Squaw Valley, California. Squaw Valley would also be the host in 1960, as well as Lake Placid in 1980. The Winter Olympics would also return to the United States in 2002 in Salt Lake City. Number 2, Pete Rozelle elected commissioner of the National Football League. In 1960, Pete Rozelle became commissioner of the National Football League, and during his tenure oversaw the game's growth in popularity and size. He oversaw the merger between the American Football League and National Football League, which was the impetus of the Super Bowl. He oversaw the league grow in television revenue, teams, and was committed, in my opinion, one of the most influential commissioners we've seen over the last 60 years. So number 2 goes to Pete Rozelle. The number 1 event that took place in this week in sports history was the formation of the Pittsburgh Steelers dynasty. 1969, 1970, and 1974 in this week were very instrumental in the formation of the Steelers dynasty, in which they became one of the most formidable teams throughout the decade of the 1970s. It all began this week in 1969 when Chuck Noll was named the Steelers head coach, and he would be the Steelers coach through the 1990 season. The following year, they used the number 1 pick overall to draft a quarterback out of Louisiana Tech named Terry Bradshaw. He will go on to win MVP awards in Super Bowl 13 and 14, and as well as lead the Steelers to 4 Super Bowl championships in the space of 6 years. But perhaps the biggest addition to that team was the 1974 draft, in which the Pittsburgh Steelers picked up 4 future Hall of Famers 2 receivers, Lynn Swann out of the University of Southern California and John Stallworth out of Alabama State. Also in that draft, they got middle linebacker Jack Lambert out of Kent State and longtime center Mike Webster. All 4 will find their way into Canton in the Hall of Fame. So that is this week's top 5 events of this week in history between January 24th and January the 30th. And now, finally, the shout-outs. To conclude this week's show, we're going to end it with a few shout-outs going out to different players, places, and things that took place in sports history during this past week. Shout out to Denver, 1984, the 34th All-Star Game. The Eastern Conference defeated the Western Conference 154-145. Young guard named Isaiah Thomas was named the game's MVP, but also taking place that weekend was the very first NBA dunk contest. Larry Nance knocked off the Dr. J in the finals to claim the very first ever NBA dunk contest. Another shout out goes to NBC. They paid $36 million in 1964 to have the exclusive broadcast rights to the American Football League. They would have that broadcast rights all the way through the duration of the league until it ended in 1969, but they will hold on to the AFC's broadcast rights all the way up until the mid-1990s. Another shout-out goes to the Dallas Cowboys, Minnesota Vikings, and Oakland Raiders, as all 3 of those teams were established in 1960. Dallas would begin play in the fall of 1960 in the NFL, along with the Minnesota Vikings, who would start a year later. The Oakland Raiders, however, would begin their life in the American Football League as the 8th and final member of that charter member franchise. And finally, Jim Plunkett and O.J. Simpson get shout-outs this week as well. O.J. Simpson from the University of Southern California, fresh off of his Heisman Trophy win, is drafted number 1 overall by the Buffalo Bills. Meanwhile, a couple of years later, after the 1971 NFL draft, Jim Plunkett was drafted by the now New England Patriots. They were the Boston Patriots before, but now they're the New England Patriots, and they draft the Stanford quarterback number 1 overall. So that concludes this week's edition of the Historically Speaking Sports Podcast. I hope that you enjoyed it. I surely did, bringing it to you. And until next time, so long, and have a great week, sports fans.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
We here at the Sports History Network proudly partner with 26 podcasts, all revolving around the history of sports. But did you know that many of our hosts were sports history authors way before they started their shows? It's true. We've got Joe Ziemba, host of When Football Was Football, Joe Zagurski, host of Pro Football in the 1970s, Mark Morthier, host of Yesterday Sports, Tommy Phillips, host of Lombardi Memories, and Scott Adamson, co-host of From the 55-Yard Line. All these authors have many books for you to choose from. To check them out, go to our website at sportshistorynetwork.com/sportshistorybooks. Pick up your copy today. Soundtrack provided by Kevin MacLeod of filmmusic.io.